Hi, I'm MacKenzie Fegan, and this is 112BK coming at you from downtown Brooklyn. On the show today, the crew is back. Did you miss us? We're going to talk about Chinese food scandals, trolling, and romance scammers. What bothered me about this restaurant is not that it's inauthentic. I think it's actually totally fine to open up an inauthentic Chinese restaurant. I think that it's fine to open up like a gluten-free Chinese restaurant. What really bothered me was the branding, where she was suggesting that that Chinese cuisine was inherently unhealthy. The 112BK crew is back, and we have a Women of Color bench so deep that some new members are rotating in today. We welcome Sasha Matthias and Andy Milyares, and Mira Al-Rahim is joining us again to talk about a new clean Chinese cuisine restaurant, a little bit of trolling, and then we'll tease an upcoming episode with journalist and author Abby Ellen, who recently wrote a book called Duped. We're going to talk about getting scammed. Welcome, you guys. So the thing that has been consuming my life of late is that a new restaurant opened up just south of Union Square called Lucky Lee's. I wrote about it for Munchies. What Lucky Lee's is all about is that it's owned by a white woman, and the whole branding is around it being a clean Chinese restaurant. And that means, clean to her means that it's gluten-free, it's dairy-free, it's peanut-free, it's MSG-free. And in her branding, she's really positioning it in opposition to normal Chinese restaurants that leave you feeling, quote, bloated and icky. So I'm wondering if you guys have had similar experiences with cultural appropriation. Let's say with insensitive cultural appropriation of your own home cuisines.
Can we talk about instances of cultural conflation of cuisines as opposed to appropriation? I know that I have a particularly big problem with restaurants that dub themselves as like Mediterranean cuisine. I really I can't stand it. I mean, there's such like diversity in cuisines of regions like bordering the Mediterranean that when I see like a feta salad on the same menu as a tabbouleh, I just like can't even bear to walk in. It's so lazy to me.
Right, and see, that's something that like not being from the Mediterranean, I would have no idea that that's inauthentic. And to me, what bothered me about this restaurant is not that it's inauthentic. I think it's actually totally fine to open up an inauthentic Chinese restaurant. I think that it's fine to open up like a gluten-free Chinese restaurant. What really bothered me was the branding, where she was suggesting that that Chinese cuisine was inherently unhealthy. Like one of the Instagram posts that she put up was somebody named Ashley C. We don't know her race, but Ashley C. was like, finally, I was telling my husband, I wish there were a healthy Chinese restaurant. And the idea that there's not a healthy Chinese restaurant in New York City, which has a population of 500,000 Chinese people, is just like totally ludicrous to me.
Right. Also, like, so much Chinese food is like dairy-free and vegetable, but like to me, Chinese food is a pretty baseline of like cleanish and healthy anyway. That this Lucky Lee's thing is just totally absurd.
Totally. Like she wrote on her personal blog, she was like, the problem with Chinese food is that there's so much soy, MSG, and processed butter. And I was like,
right.
We don't do dairy. There's no dairy in Chinese cuisine, so I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about.
Right.
Well, this MSG stuff to me is like total nonsense because like no one ever seems to recognize the fact that like MSG is like a naturally occurring compound. You find it in tomatoes, you find it in steak.
Preach, Mira.
And it doesn't make you sick. I remember there used to be this like terrible, I'm not going to name names here, but this terrible white person that I went to college with who constantly got like quote unquote MSG poisoning. And she'd be totally incapacitated, is that the word I want, for the whole day after having Chinese food. And she'd be like sitting on her couch like, oh, I think I have MSG poisoning. And I'm like, this is insane.
Absurd,
It's racist. It looks so stupid. Like I also thought it was like a really unforgivable thing that she kept on doing as well. Like she'd always refer back to her MSG poisoning.
It's a thing that was called Chinese restaurant syndrome. And this was actually initially posited by a Chinese person saying, oh, you know, a lot of people say that after they eat at American Chinese restaurants, they have headaches, they feel dehydrated. Is it MSG? And this created a whole wave of scientific experiments where I believe the ones that are most often quoted, a scientist injected mice below the skin with MSG and they got cancer. And I'm like, well, I guess
Done.
if you,
Closed,
and it was like a dosage for horses as well. It's like, I guess if I were to mainline MSG in a dosage meant for a horse,
and I were a mouse,
exactly,
I would also die, probably.
who knows what would happen? Just so absurd. And yes, MSG is like totally safe. Do your guys' cultures use MSG in their cuisine as well?
All the time. I think like Filipino food is extremely, I think people think of it as extremely unhealthy because it is salty. But it's kind of the same as if you would like eat a bunch of hot dogs or like eat a ton of pizza. You would feel gross probably, and you'd probably be on the couch. And I think people have this association with Chinese food where it's like, I'm gonna order it and like have like a pig out night or like have like a night where I'm like watching a movie, and like of course you feel sick after that. And I think also for Filipino food, or things I've seen people say, whereas there's this weird lack of moral relativism. For Filipino food, there's this famous food and street food in the Philippines called balut, which is like, it's a fetal egg and you eat the whole thing, like you eat it all at once.
It's delicious.
It's really good. I don't eat any meat anymore nowadays, but back when I did, it was really good. And like I've had friends who have said things like, I just like can't get past the fetus, like it just weirds me out, who I know eat chicken, who I know eat like pork and stuff.
Eat lamb. Lamb is just a baby sheep, you guys.
Yeah. And so I think it's, in addition to just this like idea of like it's unhealthy, it's all sort of like, there's a huge lack of moral relativism.
Absolutely.
I feel like. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the MSG thing too is because there was this huge backlash and everyone was like, Chinese restaurant syndrome, Chinese restaurant syndrome. A lot of Chinese restaurants did say, we're not going to use MSG. And my family has a Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. It's sort of like a San Francisco institution. And they never used MSG because they didn't grow up cooking with MSG. Not because it's not a part of Chinese cuisine. It can be, but because they were poor. They like lived in the country. And I was like, oh, well, like, could you afford MSG? They were like, we couldn't afford soy sauce. We couldn't afford sugar. We ate meat once a year on Chinese New Year. My cousin said that on birthdays, the birthday kid got an egg and the other egg was split by the entire family and the parents. I was like,
It's incredible.
that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. So, you know, when they came to the United States and opened up a Chinese restaurant, there wasn't MSG in their cooking, but they had to advertise it so vociferously. There was like a neon sign that was like, no MSG.
Right. Yeah, my family doesn't cook with MSG, but my mom's side of the family is Black, and so we grew up with like soul food, and they're Southern Black, like a lot of Black people in this country who came from the South. And there has, like, certainly in the last decade, especially in New York, been this, like new American push that incorporates a lot of soul food traditions that, like, people would disparage Black people for eating, like, unhealthily, like, fried chicken. And, I mean, I don't need to belabor that. But, like, if you go to certain restaurants in Williamsburg and pay, like, a certain amount of money for fried chicken, it's fine. But if you're, like, getting it from your grandmother's kitchen, it's not fine. And, like, there's that same sort of moralistic, like, you shouldn't be doing this.
Well, I want to ask
certainly
you guys
there.
about this word clean, too, because clean appeared in all of the advertising for Lucky Lee's. And what they're saying in their non-apology apologies is, whoa, like clean is being taken out of context. We didn't mean clean as the opposite of dirty. We meant clean by, you know, gluten-free, dairy-free. Like, you know, it's this word that has been co-opted by the wellness community. And what I would say to that is when you think about clean food, and I'm using that again in a wellness context, like you don't think about ethnic food. You know what I mean? It's saying that no ethnic food can be clean, by which they mean healthy, right? Like,
Right.
and that if you want to eat Chinese food or eat Indian food or eat soul food, like it has to be cleaned up in some way, suggesting that it inherently is unhealthy, which is just so dismissive of non-white cultures. I don't know. Do you guys have friends who use the word clean, and what do you presume they mean by it, or what does clean mean to you?
I use that word.
You do?
sometimes.
So what does it mean to you?
So when I think about clean, it's complicated, right? Because I think I use that word, but I like to think that I don't peddle in that kind of like the racism that it implies when some people use it to talk about like certain situations. So for example, if I'm having like, you know, a grain bowl with roasted vegetables and like a nice green goddess dressing that I made, I'll be like, I'm eating like a really clean meal today. You know,
I do understand that clean has become a code word for healthy.
Right.
I accept that. But I do think that language matters and that we should examine a little bit more like, why are we using that word? And what does that suggest about the type of cuisine that we view as clean? And yes, dirty is the opposite of clean.
Right.
Like,
I think when
that's
I
true.
say it, I just mean like, it's a very stupid way of thinking about it, but like things without sauces, like things that don't leave a residual mass or like take a lot of fat to cook, like that are just like raw vegetables and like lean meats, which do fall under that umbrella.
None of this
like,
sounds delicious.
Right, it's gross, but like that's when I'm like, I'm eating clean. It's like I'm starving, I'm
joyless.
unsatisfied.
Yeah.
This is horrific.
Yeah.
But like that's when I say it.
Right. So maybe we'll transition into our second topic, which is trolling. And this stems from the first topic because, so I wrote this piece for Munchies, but before that I put up 3 tweets, which I actually think were like quite fair and balanced. In that I said, I have no problem with somebody opening up like a macrobiotic Chinese restaurant, but there's no need to drag an entire culture in doing so. And my tweets got posted on some right-wing blog. The title was something like "Fragile SJWs Go After White Young Mother."
Wow.
Okay.
Amazing.
So,
fragile one.
So thank you. So you know the type of people who are like coming after me, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, I just got all of these terrible, venomous responses to my tweet. Some of them included racial epithets. I got an email to my personal Gmail account that told me that I should go die, like, et cetera. I think it called me a thin porn skank.
people are fucking crazy.
Anyway, the vitriol with which people, my favorite ones were actually the tweets that were like, don't you have anything better to do? It's like,
Don't you?
wait,
Yeah.
what? You're
Yeah.
the troll, dude. Have any of you ever experienced trolling firsthand online?
No, but of course I've like through other people who I've known who have been like seriously like bullied, like cyberbullied because of content that they put out there. It sounds really terrifying, and I have nothing but like the utmost respect for people that like grit their teeth and bear through it. Is that scary for you? As someone who goes through it?
It's a good question. It definitely, I wouldn't say that like I fear for my life, but it totally activates you in a way, right? Like this person, the one who emailed me, also made reference to some of my Instagram photos. So it's like, okay, look, like I am a public person. You know, I'm a freelancer, so you can find my email address. My Instagram account is public. And so I am very available to people who want to say terrible things and intimidate me. And I think that this is the balance that we all have to figure out our own personal comfort with living in the internet age.
Like, I'm not online enough to have trolls or to ever experience it firsthand, but I am really fascinated by that behavior and what they're trying to get out of it. Like, I did read the replies to your tweet and was just like astonished and sort of confused about whether or not these were even real people, because they were such non sequiturs to the actual thing you were saying, like that it was just nonsense. And like, I wonder with trolling if it's like equal parts like just trying to engender chaos, but also just like make a person feel bad about something, but also just like amplify a worldview that they believe. And I think that like different people do it for different reasons, but that it's, I don't know, I just find it so fascinating.
I mean, a larger question that I have, and maybe Andy, you can take this, is like, how much should we engage?
I don't know. I feel like it really is a case-by-case basis. Like for you, it's kind of up to you how comfortable you feel. I run the BRIC TV YouTube as well as doing other things here, but I read like terrible comments on our videos all of the time of people saying rude things and just like hateful things. And I'm protected in that way because it's like a channel.
I think a lot of it just does come from a dishonest place where these people aren't trying to engage in an actual conversation about anything and are just trying to like spit vitriol and like bully you into exhaust. And like, I mean, you feel it from the highest level in this country right now down to like Twitter replies where it's just like throwing as much of a bad thing at people until they're so tired of fighting it that they're just like, okay, whatever, this is where we are now.
And maybe this is a question for you, Sasha. One of the threads of trolling were people making fun of my name or questioning whether I was Chinese.
Yeah.
You know, saying like, well, what is, you know, you look as white as she does. Like, you know, you're obviously not Chinese. Or like, is MacKenzie a Chinese name? And I was like, actually, it's not a Chinese name, but turns out Chinese people have all sorts of names.
Right.
So I'm curious about, I'm curious about how you deal with, or if you've had to deal with people being like, well, you have no right to speak on this topic because you don't look like what I think a black person looks like.
I'm not like a public figure in that way, so I'm not really open. And like, honestly, by design, like I don't open myself up to that kind of criticism because I hate it. And I'm also like a fighter. Like I don't have it in me to not argue with people. So I just sort of try to avoid it. But yeah, I don't think I've actually had that exact thing happen. But that was, again, it was an interesting part of that dialogue on your page. That's what these people decided to attack.
Yeah,
and
they
like
really
the
wanted
people,
to hone in on that.
Yeah, and I don't know. Again, very fascinating that like in the same breath or from the same vantage point, people can like call you racist for saying what you said about this restaurant and then say like, are you even Chinese enough to say? It's just like, how do you not hear what you're doing? I don't know. It's a combination of bots and monsters.
They were definitely body.
Definitely.
Like, there was some.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe we will move to our third topic of combos. So we have a guest coming in next week. She's written a book called Duped, and it's the story of her own relationship with a man who turned out to not be who he said he was. And then she's an investigative journalist, so she writes about other people's stories as well. But there was a piece that came out in The Cut about a woman who is now 60, but in her 50s, she was a widow, and she had an online relationship with somebody who she never met in person. This was over a 2-year time period. They were, you know, digitally intimate. Is that an expression that we can use? Let's do that.
Yeah.
And she gave him, I think, $2 million. And she's speaking out because she's like, look, this is embarrassing, but this happens all the time and people don't talk about it because it's embarrassing. And it afflicts people of a certain age who may not be digitally natives. Has anyone had something like this happen to, I don't know, maybe a family member, since we are talking about kind of an older population? Or, broader question, online dating, have you ever been greeted with someone who did not seem to be who they had presented themselves to be?
Like a catfish. That's so scary.
Yeah?
Like my literal nightmare that this would happen to me. Oh my God.
But it has not happened to you. You have
No,
not been
I've
catfished.
been scammed on the internet, but it hasn't been dating related. I once bought like $400 worth of fake IDs from like China and Romania that never got delivered to me. I got this letter from Western Union relatively recently being like $250 is still unclaimed in Romania. Like, if you come with a receipt, you can give back to. Of course, at this point,
If you come to Romania with a receipt?
No, if you like come to like the teller with the receipt, like the one where you
can
dropped
get
it
the
off.
money
Of
back.
course, I didn't have a receipt. I didn't have anything, and so there's just like $250 waiting for me in Romania because of an internet scam that I like fell into twice on 2 separate occasions. I could barely finish that story in The Cut because it made me so uncomfortable to hear how like the drip of her shelling out cash to this man in small quantities at first, getting larger and larger, and my heart breaking because it's exploitation to the umph degree, and it's hard because she's like 60, she's widowed, she's a vulnerable person, and this person is totally just like taking the piss.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that she talks about a turning point where at first he asks her for a small sum and she's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And then at a certain point she's like, I can't not do this because I've already invested so much.
Right.
And so if I stop at this point, then I'm admitting that something's wrong. And I think that's something that we hear a lot from people who are in abusive relationships, where it's like, well, I better keep on throwing good money after bad or good emotional investment after bad, because like if this falls apart, then I have to face the fact that I've been fooled. And all this is a lie.
I think it's not unrelated to trolling. Like, part of being a successful predator is picking the people who are prone to that sort of shame and just like honing in on that. And like, that is why, like to bring it back to trolls, they're very good at like finding a little needly point, and like that's like what makes a good bully is like figuring like it actually requires a tremendous amount of empathy, ironically, to like know that about a person and then weaponize it. You really just have to like get into their psychology and use it against them.
I was
never thought
talking
about
to a comedian who does roasts, and she was like, women are better at roasting than men. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, men are like, you are so fat, and I don't want to fuck you. Oh! And she's like, women, she's like, I'm going to find that thing that is so tender in your heart, and I'm going to press on it.
Yeah.
I think that's really true about like trying to prey on the weak victim. And that's something that you see in real life too, right? Where it's like, you know, teen boys find the vulnerable girl, and that's the one who they, you know, they prey on or take down.
Right.
Also, like finding vulnerable victims, I read something about, you know, the Nigerian prince scam, where it's like, how is it that we're still getting spam about like a Nigerian prince? And there's a psychological reason for it, you know, because it's like, well, why wouldn't they come up with a better scam or scams that people haven't heard of? But the idea is they do a scam that most people have heard of, so that the ones who respond are already self-identifying as extremely vulnerable to this.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Wait, break that down for me just one more step, because I don't think I got it the first time.
You would think, because there's been so much coverage of the Nigerian prince scam, that they would retire that scam and figure out a new scam that no one has heard of, and that more people would then respond. But they don't want more people to respond. They want the people to respond to be a self-selecting group of incredibly vulnerable people who have, for some reason, still never heard of the Nigerian prince scam, or if they have, think that this one's different.
Right.
Jesus. Yeah.
But the only scam I've fallen for in the internet, and it's a different sort of vulnerable group, is I fell for one of those like tech support scams once. Like my laptop broke a number of years ago, and so you like Google like Apple help me, and the first thing that comes up is some third party like, yeah, give us $200 and we'll fix your thing, and I like totally ate it. And I'm still mad about it.
Did you send your laptop in, or?
No, it's so, I like, this is so embarrassing, but you call a number and they like say the word Apple enough that you believe that it's actually part of the company Apple. And they're like, okay, like pay this amount of money and we'll like triage the problem, which I did. And then like they just keep going through this rigmarole, at the end of which you realize they're totally unrelated to Apple. And you've now given them, like, you have to give them your credit card information for them to, like, engage with the tech support phone call. It's so embarrassing. Like, it's so
But that's
stupid.
the thing. I mean,
but
I
you're
understand.
like, like,
totally.
if you're like, I think I was freelancing at the time, and like, all my, you know, I'm an audio engineer. Like, all of my work was jeopardized. So I was like, yes, take whatever money you need to get my computer back on. And it was
and I just want to say about it being embarrassing, that that's the reason that people don't share stories about scamming or being taken. And the woman who was interviewed in The Cut, she was like, you know, this was a deep, shameful secret until I think she shared it with a small group of women of her same peer group. And they were like, yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me. That happened to me. And so she was like, I felt like I had to say something. And she went to the Palm Beach police, and the police were like, thank you so much for coming forward, because actually this happens to men more often than women. There are more men who have been scammed by romantic partners for millions of dollars than women, and the men will never come forward because it is so embarrassing.
I think it's also kind of about love in our everyday lives, or like examples of love we see in the media are also like we kind of believe that love requires this like sacrifice, or if like really serious or if something that you don't like happens with a romantic partner, or you even if you feel weird about it, it's this thing about like overcoming that, or like just like loving this person. And I feel like that is also heavily contributing to this like phenomenon of people being taken romantically for lots of money. I think it's so normalized even in like people I see who are like, oh yeah, that's just like a thing that she does and it's like annoying, but I deal with it. You know what I mean? It's just extremely normalized in like on like a lower scale. That for it to rise to this higher, like bigger scale, it makes complete sense to me.
That's a really good point.
Can we just provide some context for listeners or viewers that may have not read this article? It's the fact that stop me if you said this, but this woman was like a former like intelligence official in the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
She had some like lawyer experience, and you'd think that she was the last person to get duped. And
Right. She was incredibly smart.
she was an incredibly smart woman, and you'd think she'd have all the faculties at her disposal to call this out before it gets as bad as like $2 million, but she didn't.
And I think that's why it's important for somebody like her to speak out, because also how Terry Crews spoke out about his own sexual assault. And it's like you almost need someone like Terry Crews, who is a former professional athlete, or this woman who worked in intelligence in the military, to come forward and say, if it could happen to me, it definitely is happening to everyone else.
Yeah.
Does it make you guys like not want to encourage, like, let's say you did have like an older relative who was like widowed or divorced, like would you guys think twice now about like encouraging them to like seek companionship on these online dating sites? Because like I feel like after reading this article, you know, if I think about some like older people in my life who've been divorced or widowed and are looking to get back on the wagon, like I really think twice if I suggested that they go on these things. Because like I think there is a certain like amount of like technological illiteracy on behalf of like older people, and I know that's a generalization, but just like bear with me on this.
No, but it's true.
Yeah.
And it's a point that she makes in the article, and maybe we'll close out with this, that she says that there should be responsibility on the part of Match.com or whatever other sites people over 60 are using to say, hey, this is a common thing that happens, and instead of bearing into the fine print that they have no responsibility, doing some education for people who are not digital natives and maybe more vulnerable to this.
Right. So what do you think though? Would you recommend that like people in your family or people that you know get back on this?
I would, but I think that there should be more education about it. I would be like, sure, check out Christian Mingle, or no, nobody in my family's doing that.
Like
But
I mean, I'm
flags you should know
terrified
about.
constantly. My mom is a very, very good person who is not like super tech savvy, and she's like incredibly generous and charitable. And I'm constantly terrified that she's just like sending millions of dollars to people, or like different websites.
Everyone
or,
go home and educate your elders about this. That's the closing thought. Thank you guys so much for joining me to
thanks for
chat.
having
This
us.
was great.
So fun.
And see you guys next time.
Sure.